All right, welcome everybody. My name is Christina and I'm with Atlantic Institute. And this Saturday is our Self-Sufficiency 101 series. And we are talking with a local farmer to me here in Hartwell, Georgia, Mr. Ryan Winnie. And he is going to explain to you what he does for farming and for sheep. And he's going to do his best to answer your questions. All right, go ahead, Ryan. Now you can take it away.
Okay, well, good morning, everybody. Uh, Thanks for joining this morning. We're excited to have a conversation about farming and specifically sheep. And I'll just start by just giving a little background on who I am, what I do. Been farming. I'm the best of my ability to look at my genealogy. I think I'm a fifth generation farmer, but it's not as clear cut and straightforward as some people. My family came to America in the early 1800s. They were Dutch, and so ended up settling in upstate New York and lived there for. In fact, a lot of them still live there around Cooperstown area, where the Baseball Hall of Fame is. But very rural part of New York in the upstate. My great grandfather bought a 300-acre farm for, as I understand it, around $1 an acre back in the early 1900s. And so my family kind of farmed that down a couple generations. My grandfather had every animal you could possibly imagine. He had peacocks and every exotic bird and waterfowl, and they raised Arabian horses, and they had sheep and cattle and hogs. So it's pretty deep in my blood to enjoy farming. But they moved down to Hartwell, where we are, Northeast Georgia, in 1978 from upstate New York, and that's how we ended up here. And then I was born in '88, so yeah, I've been here all my life. But my dad had a cattle farm that I grew up on, and to be honest with you, when I was a kid, I didn't really enjoy farming that much because it meant chores and a lot of work. So I didn't pay much attention. But as I got older, I began to see the value of it and really started to enjoy it. And I ended up buying my family's small farm, about 10 acres here in Hartwell, when I got married, 2010. And I started raising goats then and had some cattle. And I sort of did a few different things, raised a few hogs and chickens over the years. And then we moved again 2017 to a place where we couldn't have animals. And so for a few years I didn't have animals. And then 2020 I bought a farm that was a little bit bigger, 20 acres. And we got sheep at that point, started raising sheep. And then in June of this year, September this year, we bought the farm that we're on now. So we just bought it last month. So I've been doing the sheep for about 6 years in total, but the last 4 years I've had the herd that I have now, the flock. So I thought we'd kind of start this morning by talking a little bit about, along the lines of self-sufficiency. Farming is every great society in history, and every society that's built true wealth and sustainability's been built on agriculture. And our nation was in many ways built on agriculture, and it's changed a lot over the years. There's been a lot of conglomeration of the agriculture space and industry, and there's been a recent move by people, which is a great thing, to move towards homesteading and being self-sufficient, raising their own food because of various things, such as the cost of food and concerns about what's going into our food and that kind of thing. And for me and for my family, that's been the interest and the angle that we've come from. We run a commercial sheep operation, so we're not raising them for pets. We're raising them for meat. We run about 120 head right now. Our plan is to continue to grow that. We started with about 30 head, but we'd like to continue to grow to 200 to 250, which this farm that we just bought will enable us to run those kind of numbers. So we run mostly Katahdin hair sheep. So our sheep don't have wool; they have hair. They do get a little bit of wool in the wintertime, but they shed it out on their own. So there's no shearing involved with the sheep that we raise. The Katahdin breed was developed, really started in the 70s, but it's a composite breed of multiple other breeds. And the goal and the idea with the Katahdin was to develop a breed that was resilient, parasite resistant, and good carcass. So they're heavier muscled, larger framed than maybe some of the others, but they also have the hair coat, and they're parasite resistant to a large degree. With the sheep operation, I would say what we're trying to do is we follow regenerative farming practices as far as how our management is, and our systems that we use are regenerative farming systems. And if you don't know much about regenerative farming, I encourage you to go research that. There's a lot of books and a lot of just to be honest with you, YouTube's probably the best place to look, but there's a lot of YouTube guys that talk about it, such as Greg Judy, Will Harris, Joel Salatin is probably they call him the godfather of regenerative farming. But we follow regenerative farming practices, and I thought I'd kind of hit a little bit of that because it really ties into the overall approach that we have and the overall goal and sustainability of the operation. So in short, regenerative farming is the way that I describe it to people, and there's a lot of different definitions for it that people will use, but my definition, I've sort of landed on this. Regenerative farming is creating farming systems that allow you to synchronize and work with nature instead of working against nature. And what that looks like is, for us primarily, we have about 40 acres of pasture on this farm, and we rotationally graze our sheep. So we are currently on a 6-day move. So we move our sheep every 6 days onto different paddocks. The reason for that, there's various reasons, but the primary reason is that as a farmer, famous cattleman said years ago that you may raise sheep, you may raise goats, you may raise cows, you may raise pigs or various other different livestock. But at the end of the day, to really be a farmer, you are a land steward. You're not just a cattleman or a sheep herder. You're actually a land steward, because the ground is what produces the abundance and what produces the profit and what ultimately produces the meat. So
Hey, Ryan, I
we
was going to
try
say,
to yes.
I figured I'd tell you when I did the Marina, my daughter and I did the homesteading courses that that were offered by the extension office, and they said when you start raising these type of animals, you're now a grass farmer. I thought that
Yeah,
was kind of funny
exactly.
because then I was like, you know what? I don't want to do all that, because it was like, now if you rotate, that means you have food and water that rotates sometimes, or it's set up in different areas and you have different fences and different things. And the way to set it up
Yes,
really good seemed like there was a lot of thought involved, like to set that up really well to be able to rotate every so many days, because they said essentially you're a grass farmer.
yes, that's 100% true. Because ultimately, with farming, our goal is to raise good quality meat. To do that, we have to have good quality feed, right? And so you can go to the feed store and buy feed all day long, and you can feed animals in a pen, feedlot scenario, which is the primary way that animals are finished out in America and across the world. But to be profitable with that, you have to have a very significant scale to be profitable. And even then, it's 50-50. So my approach, and a lot of the guys who I talk to, I got friends all over the country that are doing this. We try to really minimize our inputs. We want our animals to be well taken care of, well fed, but we want to minimize our inputs, because where you lose money in farming and where you lose your profit in farming is inputs. If you're having to deworm constantly, if you're constantly buying feed, if you're constantly buying supplements, any profit that you make ends up getting spent by all those inputs that you have. So going back to the cycles of nature, in the area that we live in, I think somebody earlier said they live in a hot, humid climate. We do too. We have a lot of rainfall, a lot of humidity.
Right, because she lived down in
Both
Tampa.
ways.
And yeah. And this, I
Okay,
was going to
yeah,
say, this is kind of like when you have goats. People have said goats. People are like, oh, I want goats. I want goats. And I tell people, no, I think you'd rather have sheep, because goats have to be dewormed. They have to have all kinds of stuff, and they die like easily.
yeah,
And so I think it's
they
interesting.
do.
I pulled up the Katahdin so people can see what it looks like. So I think it's interesting that you
Yeah,
guys picked this breed, because it's also you said disease resistant, right? I think,
yeah,
or
they're parasite resistant,
parasite resistant,
and
which is kind of important because having to deworm all of these takes time.
it does, and it's money, because so person in Tampa that's looking at doing this, that's your number one consideration, whether you're going to raise cattle or sheep or any animal that grazes, because in high moisture, high humidity areas, uh, parasites are a real problem. And in reality, you'll read online and they'll say, oh, this animal's parasite resistant, and we say that for the breed, and it's generally true. However, you're still going to have parasite issues with sheep, not as bad as goats, but they do have parasite issues because they're constantly grazing with their head on the ground. And these parasites live from 6 inches on the blade of grass on the plant down is where you'll have parasites. So the rotational grazing aspect of this is really about threefold. Number one, we want to have high animal hoof impact on our ground, because that is what your ground needs in order to start the natural processes. If you look at the plains area and the prairies, for years and years and years, buffalo running back and forth, trampling that ground. Some of the best, most fertile ground on the planet. Some of those areas have 18 to 24 inches of topsoil, which is amazing, because animal impact for hundreds of years. And then also, you want the animal to, when they pee and poop on the ground and they're trampling it in with their feet, with their hoof, that's a good thing. It's good for your ground. It's getting fertilized. You're getting microbials are getting activated in the soil. They're releasing nitrogen back into the soil. Those are all processes that you want. They're natural processes that you want to emulate with rotational grazing. So when we talk about working with nature versus against nature, nature's natural process, if there were no fences, animals would roam, right? They wouldn't stand in one spot, they would roam. So we want to emulate that natural process that ruminants have, which is that they move. They're constantly moving. So we want to move them to sort of create a system that emulates nature's natural order of things. So we move them every 6 days here. The reason we do that is because the parasite cycle is 6 days. So their life cycle. So you have a host, which is the sheep in this case. You have parasites, which are in the gut of. There's different parasites, but the primary parasites you deal with are the ones that are in the gut, which they call barber pole worms. So they get in and they hatch every 6 days. And so by moving every 6 days, what we're getting is, animals are pooping, and that larva comes out on the ground in the poop. And 6 days from the day that they poop, that larva is going to hatch. But we're moving them before they hatch. So as we continually move these animals, there's larvae, they're hatching, but by the time we get back to that pasture, they weren't able to find a host, because it's been, in our case, we have 7 paddocks, so we got 42 days. So in most cases, by the time they come back to that paddock again, yeah, the larvae have already hatched, in 6 days. They weren't able to find a host, and so eventually they die. And the idea is that you keep doing that over and over and over, so that you minimize your parasite issues. Also, your ground needs time to recover. I think one of the most underrated things that you can do as a grass farmer, as Christina said, because again, we're land stewards and grass farmers. That's what we're really trying to manage. One of the most underrated things you can do is give your ground rest. You can hit it really hard with animals, let them graze it heavy, and then let it rest for 42 days. Let it rest for 30 days. Whatever you can do in your specific situation, but to be able to have animals off of that ground for 30, 40, 50, even 60 days gives the ground time to recover. It gives the grass time to get back tall enough again where they can graze it. And so in our operation, we're constantly doing the rotational grazing. As Christina said, there's a lot of management with that, but it can be, when you have a good system in place, that can be very efficient over time. And so we use reels. We use electric fence reels, and we use little poly posts, and we use a solar electric fence charger. So there's no electricity required. It's just a little bit of labor, but we roll out our poly braid for fence. We put our posts in, they're step-in posts, so you just put your foot on the side of it, push the prongs in the ground, and you have a fence. And I keep mine in with 2-strand electric. And once they're trained to it, you can almost do 1 strand, and they won't push it as long as they have grass. So that's how we rotate in our system, and we do that every 6 days. And then we also we try to breed 4 times a year, because we also have a butcher shop that we just opened. So we sell a lot of our meat in there, and we want to have production, as consistently as possible. So if we have all our lambs at one time a year, then we're only going to be able to sell lambs 1 time a year. We want to have consistent flow of product for our customers in the butcher shop. So we try to breed 4 times a year, which, to be honest, is not ideal. You were going to go start doing this, you would want to breed in the fall and winter for lambs in the spring, because again, that's the natural order of things. Most ruminants will start cycling heavily in September, October, November, and then they're going to lamb 155 days later, which would be, February, March, April. And again, depending on where you're at, if you're in a heavy winter climate, like up north, Midwest, even in those areas, you don't want lambs to be born during the winter. So if you're breeding in the winter time, then you're going to have lambs in the spring, and the weather's much better. It's much easier for the lambs to get up and get going. And also you have the spring flush at that time of grass. So that's probably the best time of year for the grass as well. So again, the natural order there is the best way. It's the best approach. But we do what we do because we have to have a steady flow of product.
Hey, Ryan, I had Chantel put in the chat. She said a little bit earlier, we were talking about regenerative farming. She said regenerative farming is the system we want to use in the Valley, Phoenix East and West Valley, because she's in Arizona. She said a lot of the farms use dry lotting. Our goal is to move to northern Arizona, where they have more natural resources, just such as grass. And then she asked, how were you able to establish a grazing and rotational plan for the sheep initially? And I think maybe, I don't know, do you have an answer maybe for that? Because I think maybe some of that might have been, you were talking about what you used to rotate, but to initially establish that plan. Oh, I lost him. That's why I didn't answer.
Sorry,
Hey, Ryan.
sorry about that. I think I lost you all.
You did. I was asking you a question and I was like, oh, wait, he's in the waiting room.
Hey,
Let me. All right.
yeah,
So
sorry about that.
It's okay. So Chantel put in the chat, she said, regenerative farming is the system we want to use. In the Valley, Phoenix East and West Valley, a lot of the farmers use dry lotting. Her goal is to move northern Arizona wise, where they have more natural sources just such as
Hmm.
grass. And then she was
Right.
asking, how are you able to establish a grazing and rotational plan for the sheep initially?
So great question, and kudos to you. That's for going the regenerative farming route. I think it's the most resilient uh, farm system there is, and it's in my view, it's the only farm system. I'm not really rigid about that, but you know, if you can do regenerative farming, that's the way to go. Um, as far as establishing a rotational grazing system, you really, I think a good place to start. Christina mentioned earlier your county extension. They're going to have good information about your land, what it's capable of yielding in the way of feed, and what kind of carrying capacity it has as far as animals. Usually they do it in a unit would be 1,000 pounds. So they would say, you know, like in our county, 1 to 1.5 units per acre is sort of the average number based on what the extension agency would say. I would start there, find out what kind of carrying capacity your ground has. I don't know off the top of my head in your area. I'm not that familiar with that part of the world. I do know it's a lot drier than it is here, so you'll have an advantage in the way of parasites. You'll have a lot less issues than we have here, but you'll also probably have less available yield on your ground without planting something to run those animals. But once you figure out what your carrying capacity is, so let's just say for conversation, it's 1 animal unit per acre. That's 1,000 pounds. The numbers that we use are the average ewe, which would be the females. The average ewe is going to be 200 pounds. So we say that would be 5 ewes per acre. So then you sort of start working your way back from there, and you say, hey, okay, I got 10 acres of pasture. My carrying capacity is 50 ewes, and then figure out how many numbers you want to run. And then from there, you would start to look at your pasture on a map or an aerial view of it and kind of lay out where your water is, because you got to have water source, right? You got to have water available to them wherever they're at on the farm. In my case, I have only 2 watering locations and 7 paddocks. So I build lanes with my electric fence. That's one way that you can do it. I just build lanes to the water with temporary fencing. So, but once you figure out where your water sources are, and you know, from there you can sort of start to break it down into how many animals you're going to have, and then how many moves you want to do, and how frequently you want to move. And again, you'll hear a range of once a day or twice a day. There's guys that do it twice a day or once a day. There's folks that do it once a week, like me, once every 6 days, and there's folks that do it once every 2 or 3 weeks. I would just say, again, to keep it simple, any movement is better than no movement. And the important thing is that you don't give the animals the entire farm, because they are going to selectively graze. They're going to graze the better plants, the plants that they like, and they're going to hit those spots over and over and over again. Where if you establish temporary fencing or even permanent fencing or rotational grazing, then they're going to have to eat what's in front of them, and that's what you want. You want them to graze everything evenly.
Yeah,
So I would say,
I was gonna say when I took the class, I remember the lady was saying that if you give them the whole farm, they actually eat less and they become nutrient deficient because they're eating only things that they want to eat. And I thought that was kind of an interesting thought to think of. Like it's important to put
yeah,
them in certain areas. And Chantel, I was gonna say that your local extension office, they are all over the country and they are
yeah,
really great. I've had the lady from the extension office come out here. We did a conversation on self-sufficiency 101 on planting fruit trees, and which is recorded and on our YouTube channel. And I had the I didn't know quite where to put them because I want some fruit trees. And so the lady from the extension office over here came out and she walked with me around everywhere. And she said she gave me the good spots, the good locations, like where I'd put them and how much water they would need. And I mean, it was really nice to have her their input. And they have gone out to people that want to farm and they've helped them from the ground up, like to figure out how they
Yeah,
should do their water and how they should do their animals and their rotations and stuff like that too. And I will tell
yeah.
you, if they will connect you with grants, because I know here in this county, if you are a woman-owned, their farm, there are a couple of grants that you're available to get for like the first 10 years. So they will connect you with grants and how and what grants you can qualify for. And there's insurance here, like if it gets less rain so much per year, then there's like an insurance and stuff like that. So um yeah,
They
yes.
can also connect you with the Farm Service Agency, which is FSA is a division of the USDA. There's federal money available for loan. They do young farmer loans, first time farmer loans. In fact, I have dealt with the FSA on many occasions, and um, this farm that I just bought, um, I use the FSA to do the financing. So um, there's a lot available through the county extension office because they're connected to all those NRCS, National Resource Conservation Service. There's even money available for projects to put water on your farm,
Yep.
and in many cases, fund 95% of it. So they're a great resource all around for various different things. But to sort of close the loop on the question there and to answer it fully, once you figure out what your ground can carry, once you figure out sort of how often you want to move the animals, then you'll be able to do the math and figure out how many paddocks you need. So in my case, I wanted to ensure that I had at least a 40-day rest, and I knew that I was going to move every 6 days based on the parasite cycle. That was my primary concern. So when I did that math, I figured out, hey, I need 7 paddocks. So I have 40 acres. You just do the 40 divided by 7. My paddocks end up being, some of them are 5 acres, some of them are 7 acres, but they're 5 side. You could do it a lot smaller if you were going to do more frequent moves. Uh, but there's I could run 100 head on half an acre if I was doing daily moves, but I'd have 80 paddocks at that point. And again, which availability for labor and time. I think a lot of people get real laser focused on, oh, I need to start out moving them every twice a day. Well, maybe, but I don't know that I would start there. But starting with some idea and plan on how often you want to move them, what's feasible, what makes sense, and then breaking up your paddocks based on that. And then it'll change. It's constantly evolving and changing. I've got some predator issues over here. I got some coyotes, so I had to make some changes based on that. There's always things that are changing, but once you get started, you'll kind of flow and figure out what works and what doesn't. But that's how I would start with rotational grazing.
If you're not far from me, I know we hear the coyotes at night, so I know
Oof.
they're over that direction. There's a good pack of
They
them.
they like lamb. They like lamb as much as I do.
Yeah,
So
I believe it. When you raise your lamb, you said for meat, right?
yes,
Okay, so when how do you finish? Do you finish them off? Do you do something, or are they mainly grass fed?
yeah. So currently, I have 2 separate feeding programs, and that's based on demand. And again, it's constantly evolving. But we have some demand for grass fed and grass finished. All the product that I have is going to be grass fed because they're all raised on pasture. We don't do anything. We don't raise anything in pens as far as the ewes and the lambs and the rams. They're all grazing. However, we also have demand for a grain finished product. So when I have a group, usually there's about 30 in the group, and I may do 10 that are grass finished, and it takes a lot longer to grass finish them. So I leave them on the pasture until they're finished, and then my grain finish program is I have a old chicken house on my farm, and I just they have access to grass still there, but they're primarily being fed high quality alfalfa hay, and I feed corn, and actually I feed alpaca seed, so because it doesn't have copper. Sheep have copper sensitivity, so that's how I finish mine. It usually takes I try to get them to 100 pounds, the lambs. So I'm weaning them off their moms at 90 days. You can do it earlier, but I try to wean them off at 90 days. So they're 3 months old. They're usually going to weigh 40, 50 pounds. And then it usually takes me another 90 days to get them to 100 pounds. So I just finished a group of 17 2 weeks ago. And it took me that group took about 75 days to get to finish. So I just kind of looked at the average weights of the whole group.
All
But
right.
that's
Yeah, I
how
was
I do it.
curious.
Alfalfa
Do you,
hay.
okay,
Yeah.
I was curious, do you notice a difference, like a taste difference if you're eating the lamb?
Oh,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah.
I know I've seen in a couple of homesteading and self-sufficiency groups where some people were excited because they got cow. They all went in on a cow and the pieces that they got, and then when they cooked it and ate it, they were like, "Oh my God, this is horrible." And I think sometimes it might have been completely grass fed and grass finished or something, and they didn't realize that there was going to be a taste difference between those.
Yeah. There's a
And then
significant.
they were stuck with hundreds of pounds of meat that they were like, no, we have to figure out what to do with this because we can't stand the way it tastes. Um, I just want to say, Ellen
Yeah.
asked in the chat, she said, do you kill them yourself and dress them, or do you send them off to someone else?
So in the state of Georgia, we get inspected by the Georgia Department of Agriculture. Our butcher shop gets inspected, not the farm. So we are not a kill facility though. So we have to take our animals to a kill facility, at least a state inspected or USDA inspected kill facility. And what they do is they they do the kill. They take the hide off the animal and they have it, and then we take a refrigerated truck and we go get those carcasses. We take them to our butcher shop and we fabricate them that way. So that's the stuff that we're doing off farm. That's how we do it.
The butcher shop was hanging
So,
them? No, the butcher shop, wait, the butcher shop. I pulled up pictures so people can see. I put up just who you are on Facebook, and then I pulled up the farmer and the butcher so people can see the
yeah,
shop. And then I pulled up the sheep. Um, the
yeah. So
the processor is hanging them, or
the processor to kill and they hang sheep. Unlike cattle, have to hang at least like 14, 15 days. Sheep and hogs and deer and smaller animals like that, they only need to hang 3 or 4 days. So he'll hang them in his cooler there, and then he'll vacuum seal those sides, those halves. And so we have to keep up with chain of custody for the state. But as long as the meat is in the custody from the time that it's killed to the time that it gets to the consumer, as long as it's in the custody of a state inspected facility, then we can move that product. So now I will say, a big part of farming obviously is, if you're going to do it at any scale, you're going to have more product than you need to feed your family. And so to grow your operation, and I think one of the most important pillars of farming is, it's a community thing. Years ago, there was a butcher shop in every town. You could get your meat and eggs and whatever you needed from the local farmer. In fact, most people had hogs, at least in our area. They called them mortgage lifters because they're very efficient. They convert feed really quickly, and they're just a very profitable animal to raise. And so as we've moved towards this industrial farming system that we have in America, we're importing a lot of meat. We're actually exporting a lot of meat. it's gotten more difficult to get good quality meat locally. But if you're going to establish a farming operation, it needs to be profitable. And to do that, you need to move your excess product that you're not feeding your family to your community. And one way that you can do that is a lot of folks are doing direct to consumer sales. So the way that you can do that without having an inspected facility is, and every state's different, but generally they're all the same in that you can raise the animal, you can get it to the point of being ready to be processed. And what a lot of folks will do is they will advertise and market, maybe a whole lamb or half a lamb or even a quarter lamb, and they'll take that lamb and advertise it. They'll get a deposit for someone who wants it. They'll arrange the kill and the processing, and then they'll sell the lamb for say $400 or $500, and then the person buying the lamb is responsible for the processing fees, and they'll pick up the animal from the processor. So that's one way locally that you can sell your product without having to be an inspected facility, because there's a lot of expense in doing all that. But a lot of folks are doing that successfully. There's a girl in Texas. She has a channel, really good channel on YouTube. Shepherdess, I forget her name, but she does a lot of the direct to consumer stuff. So that's a way to move your product locally, just to your community. Farmers markets are great if you want to take animals, get them processed, get them vacuum sealed and stamped by USDA or Georgia or your state inspected facility. You can move that product that's vacuum sealed. Every state has different rules on that, but there are many ways to move the product without having to be processor or butcher shop. But one final point, and we can just open it up for questions if you guys want to do that. But one final point I want to make is the importance of farming and specifically farming regeneratively is not just about being sustainable and self-sustainable. That's a huge benefit, but one of the larger benefits of regenerative farming specifically is that it is one of the best things you can do for the environment. And there's a lot of talk in the political arena and various different arenas about things that are happening in the climate and things of that nature. And everybody's got an opinion on that, but there's one thing that's for certain, and that's that farming is one of the best things. It's one of the best tools that you can use to sequester carbon out of the atmosphere. Plants in the ground sequester carbon. There's a drawdown that happens, and when you're regeneratively farming and you're moving animals on that ground, and you're improving your ground constantly, and there's more plants on the ground over a period of years, that ground is sequestering carbon and it's storing carbon. And it's one of the most, in my view, it is extremely important that we take care of the planet that we live on, and it's one of the easiest ways to do that. It doesn't cost you anything, and in fact, it's profitable if you do it the right way. So I think it really is the answer to a lot of the issues that we have with our environment, and it's a simple way to do it, and it doesn't profit Wall Street, it profits Main Street. It helps local communities by having a sustainable farming operation. So I think that's a huge part of it. There's a lot out there on that. There's a documentary called Kiss the Ground, an incredible, I think Woody, what's his name? Actor. Woody Harrelson? I think he does
Woody
the documentary.
Harrelson. Right, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think he was part of putting it on. Phenomenal documentary. I encourage everybody to watch it. But it talks about, industrial farming has really done a number on the plains region with all the tillage and planting corn, thousands of acres of corn, and that's a real problem. So what we're talking about, grass farming and raising livestock, is a great equalizer in the way of taking care of our environment. So I think that's a huge benefit of it.
All right. Very good. Thank you for sharing all of your knowledge and information. So do we have anybody that has any further questions? I'm gonna stop the share of what we had. We had some really good questions while we were talking along, but I was curious if anybody
Okay.
has any other questions that they'd like to throw in the chat, or if you'd like to unmute yourself
I
and go ahead.
I have two questions, and the first one is a two-part. So for your pastures, do you grass seed them at any point? And if you do you include any herbs in that seed?
When our animals are on pasture, they're just eating whatever is growing naturally in the ground, and you'll find that your pasture gets really diverse as you rotationally graze. There's a seed bank in the ground, right? And there's all kinds of different plants that are in there that may have never had an opportunity to sprout for various different reasons. But when you start rotationally grazing, you'll find stuff coming up that you didn't know you had. And so we have pretty diverse pastures. I'm standing out here right now. You probably heard my donkey in the background, but I'm looking around and I can identify at least 7 different species of plants. So we don't, to answer your question, we don't, other than what's in the ground already, what's in the seed bank, we don't plant any, and we don't offer feed to our animals other than when we're finishing them on grain. So all of our ewes and our main flock, they're just rotationally grazing. We primarily have fescue, crabgrass, Bermuda. So that's kind of how we feed.
Okay, the reason why I was asking, because I'm really into horses, and I know that a lot of people who have horses, if they do seed it, they only do grass and they don't include any of the herbs and stuff like that. That's really important for them. So to get other minerals, essential minerals and vitamins and stuff like that that are missing in grass. So that's why I was asking. And then my second
Yeah.
question is that, again, because with horses, I know that to find not necessarily a good vet, but just to find a large animal vet in an area can be very difficult. Do you find, maybe in Georgia you don't have that an issue, but do you find trying to find a vet to come to look at your sheep to be an issue?
It's interesting. You're 100% right. Large animal vets are fewer and farther in between than they've ever been. We live in a heavy agriculture area, so we've got some large animal vets here. But to be 100% honest with you, I very rarely use a vet because I tend to know more about what's going on than they do. A lot of times, one of the local vets calls me and asks me goat and sheep questions. So, in my particular industry, sheep and goats, there's just not a lot that's known by the vet world in those smaller ruminants. They know cattle, they know horses, but most of them don't know much about sheep and goats. So I have a relationship with a local guy. I can call him and get any kind of medicines I need. He doesn't need to come out. He orders it for me. But I don't use a vet that often, just to be honest with you, because most of them don't know very much about what's going on with it. But if you can find a vet who is versed in whatever species you're raising, that's a huge bonus. I find that a lot of the guys in New Zealand, they're kind of leading the way in sheep. So there's a guy that's there that I talk to quite a bit that gives me advice and insight. But to answer your question, yeah, large animal vets are hard to come by.
Great, thank you. That's very informative. Thanks for answering the question.
So question,
you.
Ryan. Ryan, does that mean
Yep.
do you trim hooves, and do you do all of your own things like that might need to be done?
Yeah, we do all the hoof trimming. We have a spin chute. So just a little small piece of equipment that's on wheels, and we build a lane into the chute. We run the animals through. It kind of squeezes them, a mechanical squeeze system, and then you have a pedal and you can spin it and rotate it where the feet are up in the air. And we trim feet that way. And then we do
I've
all
seen
of our
that.
own.
It flips
Yeah.
the sheep upside down. kind of thing.
Yep. You can
Yep, I've seen that.
spin it over, trim the hooves, and then we do our own deworming. We don't do any vaccinations, so if I ever have to give shots, antibiotics, I do that myself. But yeah, we do pretty much everything ourselves. Again, low inputs, that's the key is, and it's sort of a hack in the sheep and goat world is feed grain creates hoof and horn. It makes hoof and horn grow. So if you're not feeding a lot of grain, you're not going to have the hoof issues that maybe some grain folks have. So that's another benefit of just running them on pasture.
Ellen, you were saying, where in Georgia are you? We are in Hartwell, like the northeast corner of Georgia. Close to 85 that runs from Atlanta to Greenville, South Carolina. I figured that might help you.
Yeah.
Okay. Neat, because I've seen that before, and I do think, and I do. The saying goes that the better you feed them, the healthier the animal is, the less work that you actually have to do. So
100%.
keeping them fed well and rotated and healthy and all that stuff means you rarely have to do any maintenance.
That's right. That's 100% right.
How do you handle the cold? Because I know it does get cold here. How have you handled that for them? Are they fine out there in the when it hits if it hits the teens, or if we have like a cold front coming through? Or do they have?
Yeah, super resilient. At least the breed that I have, that's part of what we look at. When we're talking about hardy, and these they can handle. If you get down to 30 below, they're gonna be challenged a little bit. They're gonna need some shelter to get out of the wind potentially, but we worry more about the heat than we do the cold, because they do need some shade. So I try to have my paddocks set up so that there's close to trees somewhere. They don't need much shade, but they just need to be able to get out of the shade a little bit in the dog days of summer, so to speak. So, but as far as cold, we're trying to lamb during that cold time, because a lamb, they're coming out wet and they're trying to get their strength. But as far as the adults, they don't have an issue at all with the cold.
All right. Very cool. All right. Any last questions? Because we are almost at noon and here on Eastern time, so we don't go ahead and wrap it up. Any last questions for Ryan?
I have one last question. Do you do tours of your facility? Do you do anything like that?
I don't advertise it or anything, but absolutely I would. I would absolutely let people come see what we do. It's not anything spectacular or fancy, but absolutely. I'll share my email with Christina, and she may already have it. But yeah, reach out to me. I'll be glad to show you.
I only have your old work email, so I don't have your actual email.
Okay. Let me share it with you.
Okay.
Feel free to share it with McCall.
And Ellen, you're in Maine, you said, right?
I'm actually originally from South Carolina.
Oh, okay.
And I'm coming.
I was like, you're going to come all the way down here from Maine?
I live in Massachusetts, but I'm originally from South Carolina. And my brother is an avid, he's a game warden. So he does a lot of deer and he processes the deer and stuff like that. But I'm really into like horses and farming and just animals. And I'm just really intrigued on trying to do more natural, holistic way of living and having animals. And so that's why I'm just really interested in what he's doing. And that's why I was wondering if he did tours or anything like that, because I'm coming at Thanksgiving for my nephew's wedding and Thanksgiving. I just thought if I had some time and whatever, but it's no big deal. But I just thought it might be a nice thing
I'd love
to
to show you. Yeah, I'd love to show you around. Send me I just shared my email with Christina. Send me an email, and let's see what dates look like. What part of South Carolina are you originally from?
Columbia, but my sister lives in Aiken and my brother we have a lake house on Lake Murray. So it's not very far. Yeah, so it's not very far. I mean, Georgia's our neighbor, so that's why I just thought. And it just might be a nice fun trip to do.
I lived in Columbia for a year. We're we're exactly 2.5 hours from downtown Columbia, so we're not
Okay.
far.
Okay. And I think
Yep.
probably Aiken's probably closer.
Yeah, Aiken's about maybe 45 minutes
Yeah.
closer.
Yeah. 'Cause
Yeah.
my sister lives in Aiken. So yeah. Anyhow. Okay. Well, I'll see how it goes and maybe chat. Maybe I'll meet you in person then.
Yeah, be
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and you can email him. I put his email in the chat. So if you had questions, because Ryan said he like, knows people all over the country, all over the world that are doing all this, he might also be able to connect you with somebody locally to you too,
Great.
or
Thank
answer
you.
other
Absolutely.
questions. All right. Any other questions? Just ask going once. And twice. If you'd like to unmute yourself, if you'd like, and say thank you to Ryan for taking the time out this morning to go stand out in the pasture and go have a conversation with us. We appreciate it. Um, Other than
Thank you
that,
both.
thank
Thank you
you.
both.
You're welcome,
very
Alice. Other than that, I will go ahead and put this up on our YouTube channel here by Monday so that you can share it with anybody or replay it if you had any other questions that you wanted to come back to. But I do thank you all. I know our conversation in November will be from somebody from, I think, North Dakota or South Dakota, where they're actually trying to teach people how to become farmers. And it's a program, it's a government-run program up there, I believe, or county-run program, or it's a university-run program or something where they're actually trying to reinstill farming as a practice that people can partake in and learn and do. And so they're actually trying to start with micro farms and different things like that where they're trying to teach people. So that's our conversation in November. And I probably will continue this conversation throughout next year because I think we have had a lot more interest in this. All right, so Ona, you said this was very interesting. Thank you so much. Chantel said thank you so much. Ellen said this was really great. Thanks. So thank you very much, Ryan. We appreciate your time. And we're going to go
Thank you.
ahead and stop our recording.